sends shockwaves throughout the community.
Tell me exactly what happened.
I don't know. He just came screaming outside.
He sees a lot of blood.
There was blood everywhere.
A loving family is torn apart at the seams.
They had a lovely marriage and a lovely family and a son.
Just the way they interacted and loved on each other, you feel like, hey, I should learn a page or two from these folks' book.
What detectives find inside the home will unlock a twisted tale of epic proportions.
There were questions of paternity, allegations of affairs, and the occult.
And the search for a killer will give rise to a fear that a monster was lurking in the shadows of these quiet streets.
It was just too horrific.
I was just hoping that this is a nightmare and I needed to end like right away.
We need to talk.
June 16, 2010. It's a warm spring morning in Tampa, Florida. But on one quiet suburban street, that balmy tranquility is about to explode in a powder keg of fear and mayhem.
This man ran outside in a panic, yelling for help, and neighbors immediately were alerted to something was going on.
He's wearing only a pair of boxer shorts.
I need help! Mama's having a heart attack!
He said his wife was having a heart attack.
Help! Go!
Emergency dispatch, what is the address of the emergency?
Is my neighbor's wife having a heart attack?
Moments later, paramedics arrive on the scene. Inside the residence, they find the homeowner, 52-year-old Olufemi Ademoye, standing over the body of his wife, Juliet, trying in vain to resuscitate her.
Hey, are they doing CPR or something?
He's trying to. Oh my God, that's horrific.
There he is, pumping her chest, doing CPR on her.
As paramedics take over, they realize that if this is a heart attack, it's unlike any they've ever seen before.
There was blood everywhere.
It was gruesome.
And as concerned friends and neighbors begin to file in, they are shocked by what they see.
The neighbors were coming in expecting a heart attack or a cardiac situation, but they stumble across what appears to be a crime scene.
Let's do our job.
Oh, we're going to help her. We're going to help her. We need you to step out.
Wake up, Juliet!
But what exactly happened inside the Ademoye home? In order to answer that question, police will root out a story far more complex and far more disturbing than a mere heart attack.
It was like a dream that I didn't want to be true.
For Juliet Ademoye, her winding path to America began in 1956 in the sprawling West African country of Nigeria.
Juliet was born and raised in Lagos, and she was very proud of that.
She was a fun-loving person, and she loved to cook.
She was beautiful. She was very friendly.
Like any attractive young woman, Juliet had her fair share of suitors. Men who promised to whisk her away from the city's sweltering club scene and into the lap of luxury. But competition for Juliet's affections came to a swift end one day in 1989, when she met a handsome and talented young pharmacist named Olufemi Ademoye, known to his friends as Femi.
And how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
You look good.
Thank you.
Femi was very, very easy to get along with. He made friends just like that.
Sparks flew when they crossed paths.
Juliet agreed to a date, and from there, their romance soon took flight.
Juliet, can I be your Romeo?
It was love at first sight.
There were very great compliments to each other.
The couple was so smitten with each other that in 1992, Femi asked Juliet for her hand in marriage.
Will you do the honor of being my wife?
She accepted, certain that she had just landed the man of her dreams.
Femi was a pharmacist in Nigeria, and he was at the top of his class. He would even consult other practices outside of the country.
He was a good provider. He really took care of her.
2 years after tying the knot, the couple welcomed the arrival of their son, Sean, who was immediately the apple of his father's eye.
Femi took Sean everywhere. Sean was very well loved by both parents.
Sean, he was their world. He was their whole entire universe. They absolutely adored him.
The Ademoyes were building a beautiful family. But life in a tumultuous African megacity could be difficult and dangerous. So in 1996, Juliet and Femi set their sights on another land of opportunity, America.
Being at the pinnacle of his career in Nigeria, he reached the epitome of his success and discussed with his friend relocating possibly to the U.S. to expand his business practices.
I said, you don't belong anywhere else but here. The next thing I know, about 2 or 3 days later, Femi was in Tampa.
In the winter of 1997, Femi procured the licensing required to set up a pharmacy in the States. Once that was done, Juliet and Sean joined him in Tampa, where they began their lives anew.
You have this couple moving from their country to America to start a new life and try to create that American dream.
I'll see you later.
It takes a lot of strength and it takes a lot of confidence, and they did it.
Living in the peaceful Tampa neighborhood of Villa Largo, the Ademoyes quickly earned a sterling reputation. Femi as an ethical, hardworking businessman, and Juliet as an aficionado of African cooking.
Femi owned Crown Pharmacy, and she owned African eateries.
They were building something together, not only a family, but also business ventures.
They've got all the successes of the American dream. I mean, they've got successful businesses. They have a beautiful son that they're raising together. They just appear to be the perfect American couple.
They were actually a relationship to envy. Other people would actually look at them and covet the type of relationship that they displayed.
And as the years passed, their undying love for their son Sean helped him blossom into an ideal teenager.
Sean was everything they wanted him to be, and more. Very intelligent kid, very active in the church. Sean used to play baseball. They were raising a very, very well-rounded child.
A relationship to envy, a gifted son, and a life of good fortune that most can only wish for. The Ademoyes were living the dream life. But that dream is shattered on June 16, 2010, when paramedics arrive at the Ademoye residence to find Femi desperately trying to perform CPR on Juliet's lifeless body.
I was just hoping that this is a nightmare and a dream that needed to end like right away. Just to show you how shocking it was to me to be living this crazy dream.
In the still morning hours of June 16, 2010, residents in the idyllic Tampa neighborhood of Villa Largo are shocked to discover a panicked and shirtless Femi Ademoye in his front yard begging for help.
Apparently, he didn't have a cell phone with him at the time, so he goes to a neighbor and she dials 911.
As they race to the residence, emergency responders are informed Juliet has suffered a heart attack. But the scene inside the Ademoye home is far more gruesome than your average cardiac arrest.
It's clearly not a heart attack.
The neighbors say he was performing CPR and it already looked like Juliet was gone. Rigor mortis had already set in her body.
Femi appears so distraught that EMTs must forcibly separate him from his wife.
That is a lot for a partner to take, coming and finding your partner lying down in a pool of blood.
We need to work. Juliet, we need you to Juliet! He was detained in order to be able to control him because he was hysterical.
Thankfully, the Ademoye's 16-year-old son Sean isn't home to witness this horrific sight.
At this point, when all this happened, Sean was already in Europe, in France, on a school field trip.
At approximately 9:50 a.m., police arrive on the scene. Like EMTs, they question why, if Juliet had suffered a heart attack, is there blood everywhere?
I haven't seen one like this in a long time.
High splatter marks in the upper corner of the bed.
There was blood everywhere. There was blood all over the walls, the sheets.
There was blood soaked into the mattress. There was the headboard that had blood staining on it. There was blood going into the bathroom on both the left side and on the right side. Those were also both cast-off stains.
They noticed also that there was some blood on the side of the actual toilet in the master bathroom.
Despite the mass amount of blood, Femi Ademoye keeps repeating the same phrase over and over.
He kept saying, my wife, she's having a heart attack, she's having a heart attack.
Was Femi too panicked to think clearly?
He was genuinely distraught. He was genuinely in shock.
Femi is so inconsolable that he is unable to give a proper statement to police. They decide the best move is to extricate him from the crime scene and record his statement at the station later on. But even without a formal statement from Femi, police on the scene are certain of one thing. Juliet Ademoye did not die of natural causes.
She had bruising all throughout her body, on her back, on her buttocks, the back of her legs, on the front of her legs, on her right breast. She had a stab wound to her left shin. She had a stab wound to her right shin, and she had 2 stab wounds to her face, one by her left eye and one right on the forehead by the hairline.
And Juliet's multitude of mortal wounds isn't the only sign of foul play.
There was also a cross that was drawn in blood that was actually located on a pillow near Juliet's body.
While emergency personnel tend to the body, investigators await the go-ahead to conduct a search of the house.
Once Mrs. Ademoye's body's removed, no further search of the house is conducted until a search warrant is actually obtained.
Police start looking at evidence. They have to piece together what happened.
As technicians process the scene, investigators turn their attention to possible persons of interest.
Law enforcement, when they're investigating, they usually start with the family. They start with relatives and the person closest to the victim. And in this case, the person closest to the victim was her husband, Femi.
After removing him from the house, police bring Femi to the sheriff's office for questioning, where he is still so distraught he borders on incoherent.
We want to talk to you about what happened today.
Oh my God.
That's what we want to talk to you about.
God. Oh my God. Where are you?
He's acting, erratic. He's very, very panicked.
My wife is dead. Yes. My wife is dead.
Yes. And you know what? Femi. You know what? Femi. Femi, I cannot talk to you when you're this upset.
Though seemingly racked with grief, Femi makes what on the surface appears to be a startling admission, one that will leave investigators clamoring for more details.
What now? I'm sorry. Simple argument? Oh, Jesus.
I had just seen Juliet the previous day. She was just at my pharmacy. And every time she comes, she makes it a point of duty to come by and just wave at me to let me know that she was there. And she just poked her head and said, hey, Ken, I didn't know at the time that was the last time I was going to see her. And the next morning, got a phone call.
June 16th, 2010. What initially seemed like an ordinary day in Tampa, Florida, has turned into a scene of heartbreak and death. 53-year-old Juliet Ademoye has turned up dead in her own bed, and the circumstances are baffling.
There were no 911 calls that night from anyone. In the morning, again, no reports of any domestic violence, no reports of disturbances from the home. So police have to take that into consideration.
While CSIs are processing the gruesome scene inside the Ademoye residence, investigators with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department are questioning Juliet's grief-stricken husband, Femi.
Femi. I know you're upset.
Although Femi's sense of loss is palpable, he eventually makes a tantalizing admission.
What now? I'm sorry. Simple argument? Oh, Jesus.
He admitted that he and his wife did have a fight.
His story is basically that they began to argue. And at some point, he had gone into his son Sean's room just to go to sleep. Sean was apparently on a school trip.
While the possibility of a marital dispute is an attractive lead for investigators, what Femi says next adds another layer of intrigue to the case.
Later on that night, I heard something.
While he's tucked away in his son's bedroom, he does notice that the garage door opens and there's movement within the house, but he doesn't leave the room.
He doesn't know what exactly is happening. Maybe Juliet left, maybe someone came into the home.
He then falls asleep, and it's not until he wakes up the next morning around 9:30 and he realizes he's late to work. He's trying to find his cell phone.
He's looking for, his cell phone. He stumbles across Juliet's body.
He went into her room. He saw her, and he just panicked. There was blood all over the bed, and she seemed unconscious, and he began giving her CPR on the bed.
Baby, wake up! No!
Given the fact Femi was sleeping in his son's room, detectives can't help but wonder if an intruder could have slipped into the couple's home that night without him realizing it.
Femi wasn't acting like someone who had just violently beaten and stabbed his wife to death. He appeared truly devastated.
Statements collected from Femi's neighbors seem to support the notion that he had nothing to do with his wife's murder.
Witnesses say that when Femi left his home and ran to neighbors, he had on his underwear, and there was no evidence of blood anywhere on his clothing or on his body.
The crime scene was absolutely horrific. So to see that in contrast to how clean he was, it just didn't make sense for them to equate him in her murder.
While police continue their interview with Femi, back at the Ademoye's home, CSIs continue to analyze the crime scene.
So one of the things that law enforcement will do is that they will check all of the doors and all of the windows to see if there's any evidence of forced entry.
Investigators have to look at everyone in the family, and also, was this a burglary?
Investigators are keenly aware that Tampa is no stranger to such occurrences.
There is an increased likelihood that murder or violence would happen here. Tampa is also known for homelessness, for drugs, for trafficking.
But a thorough examination of the doors and windows yields no signs of forced entry.
While there's no sign of a break-in, it's still certainly plausible that Juliet could have inadvertently let someone in that evening. If it's true that the couple had had a fight, she could have been in a heightened emotional state and simply forgot to close the garage.
Still, there are other, more concrete problems with the robbery theory.
Crime scene technicians went all through that house. There was no evidence that any property was taken.
So now, this is looking a lot less like a random crime and more likely one where Juliet was specifically targeted.
Later that same day, detectives begin reaching out to the Ademoye's friends and family, both in the Tampa area and beyond. What they learn illuminates another, steamier side to this American success story.
Everything from the outside looking in seemed perfect, but apparently there was talk of an extramarital affair on the part of the wife.
She would have one affair after the other.
According to statements from both friends and family, from almost the moment Femi and Juliet arrived in America, she began sleeping with other men. But her latest affair took place 6 months prior to her murder, when she rekindled a romance with an old flame while visiting her native Nigeria.
That's where she allegedly met this man and consummated their affair years earlier. Apparently, Juliet had reconnected with him on a recent trip to Nigeria.
It seemed that when she returned from Nigeria, that she continued contact with the gentleman that she had rekindled a friendship with while she was on her trip.
She was back from Nigeria about a month, and Femi could sense something was happening.
Over time, with being busy, raising a child, going to work, providing, over time people can become complacent and stop really working on the relationship, and they're starting to feel their emotional needs are not being met.
With Juliet allegedly engaged in multiple affairs, the pool of potential suspects has just gotten significantly deeper.
Now you have all these other individuals as well. Any one of them could have had cause to harm Juliet.
While police try to learn more about the identity of these individuals, an investigator presses Femi about his relationship with his wife.
I loved her.
Femi maintains that even though Juliet's affair hurt him, he remained committed to the marriage.
They were trying to move forward, but this was an issue that was at least in the background of their relationship.
They really wanted to solidify the marriage and make it as strong as possible so they did not have to encounter any more hardships.
Well, he did say that she had a lot of faults, that he couldn't trust her at times. He loved her very deeply.
He was able to turn his head because he loved her so much, and he felt that was like a deficit that he could tolerate. They had talked about it so many times. They had gone and talked to someone at the church about it.
Femi seems to genuinely love Juliet, but investigators wonder if living with a philandering wife ultimately sent him over the edge. However, according to Juliet's friends and family, she wasn't the only one who was sleeping around.
According to her family members, it was actually Mr. Ademoye that was doing the cheating and had cheated several times during the marriage.
If these allegations are true, then the number of suspects has just doubled again. But before detectives can run down Femi Ademoye's many alleged lovers, another shocking statement will add a bizarre new layer of intrigue to this increasingly scandalous case. One that has less to do with jealousy and betrayal, and more to do with witchcraft, black magic, and one woman's desire to rid herself of all her shame and suffering. Following the death of Juliet Ademoye, authorities in Tampa, Florida have discovered that Juliet and her husband Femi, a pharmacist and well-respected member of the community, had both purportedly strayed outside of their marital bonds.
They had allegedly both engaged in extramarital affairs at some point during their marriage. The question now is whether or not that fact had anything to do with Juliet's death. Police are certainly going to want to investigate these allegations.
They have to look at everyone and all scenarios to find who did this, who caused this woman's death in such a violent manner.
While investigators continue to track down the names of both Juliet and Femi's paramours, inside an interrogation room, a detective presses Femi for more details.
You got into a fight about her infidelity, right? How did that fight start?
I was suspicious. So I looked into a computer and found out that she was cheating on me.
There were some emails on her computer that were apparently discovered by Mr. Ademoye. It's clear from the tone of these emails, from the context of these emails, that she's communicating with another gentleman back in Nigeria.
But according to Femi, it wasn't the confirmation of the affair with the man in Nigeria that set him off.
She sent this gentleman an attachment which contained photographs of Sean and saying, here's a photograph of your son. Who do you think he looks like?
It's very strongly implied in these emails that Sean may not actually be Mr. Ademoye's son.
These emails were explosive, to say the least.
Heartbroken and defeated, Femi says he took dramatic action.
He started calling family members, exposing her for the cheater that she was, letting people know all the details of what were in the emails. And that, to him, was the best revenge, was shaming her.
He wanted to be vengeful toward her, and he knew by shaming her, that would destroy her image, destroy who she is, destroy her connection with her family back home.
To have a child out of wedlock is the ultimate disrespect and being disgraced.
No, I don't deserve this! Put the phone down. I do not deserve this!
But Femi admits the couple's dispute that night didn't end with the series of embarrassing phone calls to friends and family.
There was an altercation, there was a bat.
Juliet felt out of control and angry and tried to figure out how to try to make him stop.
She picks up a bat and she starts swinging that bat. He sustains injuries on his shoulders. So you can imagine how violent this fight is.
She was hitting him. She was pulling the phone away from him.
They then struggled over the baseball bat. And as he was trying to get the baseball bat away from her, it did strike her one time in the head.
one of the individuals released the bat, or the bat was pulled out of their hand, and it caused the bat to hit Juliet in the forehead.
Femi says he wrenched the bat away from Juliet, and for the moment, it seemed as though their emotional tempest had blown over.
He finally was able to get her off of him, and he threw the bat out in the hallway.
And then Femi walked out, and then she ended up going into the bathroom.
There was blood on the commode that showed that, something happened. So Femi tells police that his wife may have slipped and fell and injured herself, or perhaps that even caused her death.
Femi is adamant he's telling the truth, but detectives point out that his story doesn't explain the bloody scene in the master bedroom.
I mean, the crime scene was absolutely horrific. There was blood splatter everywhere.
But Femi believes there's an explanation for the carnage in the bedroom that dates back to Juliet's West African roots. A ritual rooted in black magic, fueled by blood, and capable of bringing death to those who abuse its power.
There are those that say that she was a follower of the voodoo religion, and she did certain voodoo practices.
At the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department in Tampa, Florida, Femi Ademoye has admitted to investigators that he and his wife Juliet got into a physical altercation the night before she was found brutally murdered in their master bedroom. But despite the suspicious circumstances and allegations of infidelity, Femi is adamant he didn't kill his wife.
His story was that his wife attacked him with a bat, they wrestled over it, and she accidentally hit herself in the head. He said he then went to his son's bedroom while she headed to the bathroom.
But if Femi's story is true, detectives are curious how a minor head injury could yield so much blood.
There was blood in the bathroom, but she might have fucked the bathroom.
But it's what Femi says next that truly stuns detectives.
When she came back from Nigeria, she came back with voodoos, dolls, and incantations and everything.
This may have been part of a blood ritual to cleanse Mrs. Ademoye of her shame.
He learned that she was practicing voodoo. Her lover was into voodoo.
He says this gentleman from Nigeria was part of the voodoo culture there and was a very high-ranking member of a specific cult.
The shame that she felt from her affair being discovered, she decided she needed to cleanse herself of that guilt and that shame. And voodoo allows you to do that.
Being shunned and shamed actually has an enormous impact. I mean, significant to the point that it not only affects them in this life, but also in the afterlife.
Femi recounts to investigators the details of his wife's voodoo rituals and what he believes happened the night she died.
Femi thought that during the voodoo cleansing that Juliet slipped and hit her head on the commode.
But what about the lacerations, knife wounds, and other injuries found on Juliet's body?
Femi was saying that she caused these wounds to herself. Juliet had several cuts, which her husband said were the result of the voodoo practice where she was trying to cut herself to cleanse herself of the guilt and shame. Femi felt that while his wife was performing the voodoo ritual, she was moving around the home and doing these movements that caused a lot of blood to splatter on the walls and on the floor.
She sought forgiveness by putting the cross on her bed, by putting the blood on the walls, which is consistent with their culture when they're seeking some sort of forgiveness.
Femi believes Juliet was so desperate to remove the stigma of her sinful acts, she took her cleansing ritual one deadly step too far.
Essentially, he believed that she must have eventually passed out because of her injuries and bled to death.
Investigators aren't sure what to make of Femi's story of accidental death by voodoo, but to them, it seems strange that Juliet didn't ask Femi to take her to a hospital once she realized she'd gone overboard with her self-mutilation.
Right? Why didn't she come to you for help?
I don't know why she didn't come to me.
If Juliet was hurt at that time, she might have not reached out for help because she felt so ashamed that she deserved this.
She knew that if she did live, that she was going to be so disgraced. She just decided that she was going to seek forgiveness and to let herself die.
After concluding his statement, Femi requests that detectives allow him to make a phone call. They consent and agree to give him some privacy, or so it appears to Femi.
The call was being video and audio recorded.
When the call is over, detectives review the tapes, but they quickly realize that Femi is speaking in his native Yoruban tongue.
So they call in a linguist and have them come and translate what's being said. What they hear is what astonishes them.
He is crying, and he's saying repeatedly over and over, God have mercy on me. Jesus have mercy on me. God, forgive me for my sins. Obviously, this is very damaging evidence for him. Had his wife just fallen and hit her head on the toilet, this is not the type of things that he would be saying to his close friend and asking God for forgiveness.
Now, once the translator, transcribes what is being said, they know without a shadow of doubt in their mind that this is our God.
It's a belief that is bolstered by another discovery CSIs make back at the crime scene.
In the hallway outside their son's room, a detective noticed a pile of toys along the wall and decided to search it.
They found a bat underneath the toys.
It was discovered there was blood on the baseball bat.
While a CSI tags and logs the likely murder weapon, police discover something else.
There was a knife found in the kitchen. It was a knife that had a thin blade, and the tip of this knife was bent.
The knife was found in the kitchen sink, and it had been washed off.
Police believe that Femi must have attempted to hide the bat following the attack, and that he subsequently washed the knife off in the kitchen.
Less than 36 hours into the investigation of Juliet's death, police arrest 52-year-old Femi Ademoye on the charge of second-degree murder. Shortly thereafter, the Ademoye's teenage son, Sean, in Europe on a class trip, is notified of what's transpired.
Sean was very, very sad. He just cried. I was just completely flabbergasted. I didn't know what to think, how to rationalize anything.
But a final showdown is still looming. And in a court of law, one good lawyer can make what looks like an open and shut case anything but.
The medical examiner said, I can't rule out that this injury to the head was caused by that glancing blow on the toilet bowl.
Voodoo is an ancient West African religion practiced by more than 30 million people around the world. It is estimated that at least 1.5 million voodoo practitioners reside in the United States. Those who practice voodoo believe that humans share the world with spirits, and that those spirits can impact the living by bringing good luck, bad luck, or even death. On January 14, 2015, Femi Ademoye is marched into a courthouse in Tampa, Florida to stand trial for the brutal murder of his wife, Juliet. State attorneys take the floor and spell out for the jury how Juliet's death could not have been the accident Femi described in his statements. Rather, it was murder.
The cause of death was twofold. There were 3 lacerations to the back of her head, which caused her essentially to bleed out. In addition to that, the medical examiner saw signs of fat emboli.
Prosecutors assert that the presence of fat emboli, fat that is liquefied due to extensive bruising, causing a potentially fatal blood clot, is proof that Juliet was beaten to death.
In many of these bruised areas, you're able to see areas of what the medical examiner was calling areas of clearing. This was consistent with the use of some kind of long instrument, such as the baseball bat.
But prosecutors say the attack wasn't limited to bludgeoning by bat. There is also the matter of the bent knife found in the kitchen.
Our theory was that he attempted to stab her with this knife and actually bent the knife on Mrs. Ademoye's skull.
She also had injuries to her hands. Those were characterized by the medical examiner as defensive wounds. So she was fighting back.
From a prosecution perspective, there is no way to account for the number and extent of Mrs. Ademoye's injuries other than homicide.
Bolstered by this evidence, the prosecution's next move is to establish motive.
When you discover that your spouse is being unfaithful, when you start to question the paternity of the child that you've raised, he found these emails, you know, from his wife and her lover saying, this is your son. It was definitely damaging.
I mean, talk about betrayal. That could send anyone over the edge.
The prosecution alleges that after beating and stabbing Juliet, Femi hid the bat, cleaned the knife, and then plotted his alibi.
So he did a very poor job of trying to clean up the scene and then running out of the house and making up a lie, essentially, that his wife was having a heart attack.
It's a simple, straightforward explanation of the crime. Perhaps too straightforward, at least according to Femi's defense team. After all, it's entirely possible that Femi killed Juliet in self-defense.
According to the defense, there was a struggle with the bat, back and forth, back and forth. She actually hit Femi, and then he accidentally, when he pulled the bat away, she ended up hitting herself in the head.
He says he then locked the door, and for the remainder of the evening, he stayed in the bedroom and does not know what happened to Juliet.
The defense emphasizes to the jury that when paramedics arrived on the scene, Femi had no blood on him.
He ran out in his shorts, no blood or anything on his shorts, and he called for the police.
Femi's defense team also stands up on Juliet's alleged belief in voodoo, as well as her desire to rid herself of the stigma of adultery, which they say could have led to a tragic accident or driven her to suicide.
She fell on that toilet bowl, and she got dizzy, started realizing that she was losing a lot of blood, and she made the choice at that time that she was not going to live in disgrace.
The defense basically painted a very, very vivid picture of her slipping, hitting her head, and possibly reaching a point that may have been near death. And Juliet may have very well knew that, you know, she had lost a lot of blood and that this may have been it. And as opposed to resisting and fighting for her life, she just simply succumbed and in a state of despair just gave up.
Taking aim at the medical examiner's findings, the defense then brings in their ringer, famed forensic pathologist, Dr. Vincent DeMaio.
He blew that fat emboli out of the water, and we absolutely showed a person with fat emboli in their lungs so bad that it would kill them, compared to the fat emboli that Mrs. Ademoye had in her lungs. And she had like a couple of % of fat emboli in her lungs, which could not kill her.
It's not uncommon at all to have two potential causes of death, and this was an issue at trial.
The medical examiner said, I can't rule out that this injury to the head was caused by that glancing blow on the toilet bowl where she could have fallen.
The defense's forensic experts clearly score points with jurors, but in their rebuttal, prosecutors are quick to strike back with a star witness of their own, the Ademoye's teenage son, Sean.
When Sean took the stand, the couple's son, they asked him, did your mom practice voodoo a lot? Did you see her practicing voodoo? Did you see candles and all these figures that would show that somebody... No. I mean, he never supported the defense's theory that his mom was practicing voodoo.
What was most telling was that the murder weapon, the baseball bat, was located under a pile of toys in the hallway, and the knife was located in the sink in the kitchen. Had Mrs. Ademoye hurt herself, she would have then had to leave the bedroom, hide the bat, go to the kitchen, dispose of the knife, and then get all the way back to the bedroom to get on the bed. However, that would have been impossible, obviously, with the condition of her injuries.
At what point do you conclude that this is so unlikely that it's just ridiculous?
On Friday, January 30th, 2015, Nearly 4.5 years after Juliet Ademoye's tragic death, both sides rest their case. Less than 2 hours later, the jury returns with a verdict.
They found Mr. Ademoye guilty of second-degree murder with a weapon.
The verdict was never in doubt to me.
I was shocked at the verdict. They had the burden of proof, but there's no way in the world that this case can survive a verdict of guilty because it's just not there.
But whether justice was served that day or not, the scope of this tragedy stretches far beyond the verdict.
This couple was very well respected and very successful, and on the outside looking in, we saw, you know, this wonderful family, but we're all going through something, through a difficult situation. Unfortunately, this situation escalated in death, and that's very, very sad for everyone.
I lost two friends. Two friends that had a very great influence in my life personally and in my relationship with my family. I miss that terribly. And I just want to pray that Juliet's soul continue to rest in eternal peace.